And I'd like to take a few moments today to speak with you about my game concept, Shadows of the Deep. In Shadows of the Deep, the player finds themselves in the role of the protagonist who has discovered the awful secret of the town of Innsmouth, Maine, that the town's inhabitants are all descended from fish people known as the Deep Ones, and have an unholy cult that sacrifices normal human beings to their Deep One ancestors. The player must try to escape, either by fighting or fleeing the Deep Ones and their cultists, but too much contact with the Deep Ones and their cultists can drive the character insane, so they have to minimize contact with the enemy in order to be able to survive the game with their wits intact. A 2D top-down game, Shadows of the Deep offers a tense atmosphere normally associated with survival horror games, in addition to the greater narrative depth of role-playing games. In it, the player can navigate the game world horizontally and vertically, and using an action input to do things like jump obstacles or other types of gaps that are in the game world, open up chests or other items that may contain things that they can use on their quest, or otherwise interact with the game world and the NPCs therein. An inventory menu allows the player the opportunity to see what items they're carrying and utilize those items to do things like restore hit points or help them navigate the various scenes in the game. Whenever a character does come into contact with a Deep One or one of their spawn, the character's resolve meter is dinged slightly, so it does behoove the character to try and evade the Deep Ones and their spawn whenever possible on the game map, because if their resolve meter reaches 0, they go irrevocably insane and the game ends. When a player does come into contact with a Deep One cultist or one of their spawns, they are brought into a battle system type game map where they can use attacks, utilize items in their inventory, use special skills that are inherent to the player itself and are developed through leveling up the character, or try and run away from the encounter. During the middle of levels, which are called chapters in this game, the player can select which of the two interludes that they'd like to do, which is basically a mini-level that is going to offer different things depending on which path they take. Some of the interludes offer more experience points and more enemies to fight. Others offer different types of equipment. Most of the game's storyline is based off of the game Shadow over Innsmouth by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. In it, and his other Cthulhu mythos stories especially, Lovecraft explores things like horror, madness, the cosmic insignificance of man, and disturbing things that happen when humans interbreed with alien creatures. Similar titles to the game are Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which shares its 2D look and also some of its narrative structure, but is otherwise a very different game. There's Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, which is a three-dimensional version that actually does have a few chapters of Lovecraft's Shadows over Innsmouth contained therein, but is a very different game otherwise. And the virtually unknown Innsmouth no Yakata, which was a Virtual Boy title that sold less than 1,000 units in Japan. Apart from the limited understanding that myself and the grouping of the 4 other students have regards to programming and implementing a game in Unity, there's really very little in the way of risks in terms of creating the game. All of the Lovecraftian information on Shadows over Innsmouth is lying entirely in the public domain, meaning the story can be utilized without any concern over rights or licenses. At most, it would probably have 4 to 5 chapters, and a lot of the sprites could be reused just by giving them palette swaps or different types of coloration. One of the biggest challenges in the game will be balancing character improvement, whether it's level advancement, equipment types, or the number of enemies contained in a chapter, and how easily that the player can evade them. My photo references are listed here. Any photos that aren't